So we've started our recording. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, what we're going to cover today is preparing and saving images for the web. So what I have for you here, this is my dog Bagel. It was taken with my phone. So if I wanted to put that up on the web, what would I do? The first thing that I need to do with any image is to check the size of it and the file type. It is a JPEG, I can tell that right here. I can look at the bottom here as well in Photoshop. Let me move the little panel that I have here. And I can see that this is 56 inches by 42 inches at 72 pixels per inch. That's a big image for the web. Typically in web measurements, we measure in pixels, not in inches. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to in Photoshop here. Okay, I need to go to image size. I'm going to start to make some changes here in them. So I can check it out here. So it's 4,032 pixels by 3,024 pixels. That's the original size. And that translates to 56 by 42 inches at 72 pixels per inch. Now, if I wanted this for print, to get an idea how big this would be for print, I would turn off resampling. And I would change this to maybe 240 pixels. And I could see that it's a pretty decent size. It's almost 13 by 17 inches. It's at least 12 by, close to, 12 and a half by almost 17 inches. That's a nice big image to print at high resolution. But I'm not going to use it for print, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and cancel this. And what I like to do to keep this as my original, since I do plan on using it for print, is that I'm going to duplicate the file first. So I'm going to go to image, and I'm going to select duplicate. So I have a copy of this, and I can rename it at this time or not. And now I need to prepare it, excuse me, for the web. I'm going to leave it at 72 pixels per inch, because that's just fine. 72 pixels per inch is screen resolution, and that's all the higher resolution that you need for images on the web. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the layer. It's just a good practice to get into since this has been edited. And now I'm going to go back up to image size, and I'm going to change it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reduce the size of all of this. So I don't need it to be quite so big. I'm going to change from inches to pixels so that I can actually see what I'm doing here. And if I want to keep the original proportions, then I could just say, okay, maybe I want this only 400 pixels wide. Okay, but notice how it's distorting it. Well, I got to make sure that it's linked. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, reset this so that it's back to where it was. Now let's go ahead and link the width and the height together. I don't want it distorted. So make sure that they're linked. So I'm going to switch back to pixels. Now, a pretty good size image for the web is 400 pixels. I mean, maybe for a large image, it could be 800, 1200. For a large screen, it could be as big as 1200, even 2000 pixels, but not as big as what we have. So for a good size image on the web, 400 would be just fine. But it's a good idea to know in advance approximately the size that you need. And because this is a fictitious web page that I'm creating, I'm deciding in advance that 400 by 300 is just fine for me. So I'm going to make it smaller and zoom in here. Now, the next thing that I need to decide is, now that if I can go back to image size just to make sure. It's 400 by 300 pixels at 72 pixels per inch. That's the exact size that I need for my website. So if I want to save this for the web, what I should do first is save this as a Photoshop file so that this will be my original before I go saving it in the other file formats that are required for the web. On the web, you cannot use the Photoshop file. It has to be either JPEG, GIF, or PNG. And that's what I want to cover today, is to show you which of these compressed file formats work best for certain images. So I'm going to save my original file first as a Photoshop file. So I'll do save as. Okay, I'm going to save it on my computer. And I'm just going to save mine on the desktop right here. And I'm going to name this Bagel Blanket. And I might already have one here. I don't want to replace it. So I'm going to call it Bagel Blanket 2. Actually, I'm going to name it Bagel Blanket for demo. There we go. So here's my original file that I would use, and not for print, but for the web, because remember, I reduced the size to 400 by 300 pixels. So now what I can do is say, I'm happy with it as is. Now I'm ready to save it for the web. There are a couple of different ways that you can do that. I'm going to show you the old way first. So if I go to File and I go to Export, I can go to Export Save for Web Legacy. And this is really nice. It's not really used much anymore, but I prefer it. You can view the original here. You can view the optimized here, and you can look at it 2 up or 4 up. And I like 4 up because it shows the original in the upper left-hand corner. And then I can compare and contrast with the other file formats. So for example, I have by default JPEG selected at very high quality, which means a lower compression. If I have a low quality, then that means it's a higher compression and it will be a smaller file size. So now what we're looking at over here is we're looking at something that's 352K, which is a relatively small file. But if we look over to the right, you can see that when it's compressed as a JPEG, it's only 62K. And on an old modem, 56K kilobytes per second, it would take 12 seconds to download. Well, if I say, well, that's pretty good. You know, I mean, I can come down here and I can switch and I can say, you know what, I have a cable modem here. So it's going to take 2 seconds. So that's a non-issue. But back in the day when we were concerned a bit more about that sort of thing, since everybody has T1 line access to T1 lines or cable modems or whatever, these file sizes are not so important anymore. But if I want to compare it with the other file formats, remember I said that we could use JPEG, GIF, or PNG. So I'm going to select this one in the lower left-hand corner. And then instead of JPEG, I'm going to select GIF or GIF, however you want to pronounce it. Both are used. GIF is actually the original correct way, like giraffe. But GIF is the one that's more commonly used. So if I want to compare these two, I could zoom in and look at them, look at the quality of each. And if they look the same quality, then I'm going to look at the file size and the download time. And you can see that a GIF file takes considerably longer to download. It takes 18 seconds at 56K. And it's a little, it's considerably larger. It's 96K. So I'm not going to pick the GIF. That's not going to work for me. So I have one more option. I have JPEG, GIF, or PNG. So I'm instead of, this is also a low quality JPEG here. And if I was going to use a really small image before I show you the PNG, I might decide instead that, you know what, I could go with a higher compression, because if it's a little thumbnail image and I can't see the difference, not unless I was going to zoom in and look at it and make a really concerted effort to make a really strong comparison here. And if I can't tell the difference, you probably can't see it over here, but there is a little bit of a difference. So if I was going to show it as a pretty good size, I wouldn't want to use a low quality. But if I was only going to present it on the web as a small image, as a thumbnail, and I couldn't see the difference, then you could see that this would even take less time than the high quality. It would only take 4 seconds. So maybe that would be okay. So on the fly, before I even save the image, I can make these comparisons. But let's go ahead and compare it to a ping, and I'm going to do a ping 24. And a ping 24 actually takes longer than all the others. It would take 43 seconds to download with a 56K modem. But again, if I switch over here and I look at, a cable modem here, again, 2 seconds, it's nothing. So it's really a non-issue these days. So let me go back and change that back to 56K, which is still a standard. So the choice would be for a JPEG. That's what I want to save it as. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. And the next thing that I want to do is that I want to talk about the structure that you use for naming. And I'm presuming everybody can see this. If you can't, please let me know. That when you're naming a file for the web, you never want to start the file name with a capital letter. You never want to use a space between the words if there are multiple words that you're using to name the file. The only way that you can add space between them is maybe use an underscore. So if I had bagel and I had blanket, and I said 4, and I said demo, I could do that. That's legitimate because these aren't actually open spaces. But what I prefer to do, and this just is my preference, is what I use a system called a camel casing. And what that is that you start the file name with a lowercase letter. And then every time there is a new word, you can use a capital in the middle of it. You can also use at the very end, if you want to name this version 1, 2, 3, whatever. So if I want to go ahead and I want to name it version 1, I can do that. The other thing that you can't do, aside from starting with a capital letter, is that you cannot use special characters. The web doesn't like that. So if I decided in here that I wanted to put, bagel blanket, and I wanted to use a $sign or something, that won't work. So no special characters. So those are the rules for naming. Now, once I have decided on a name for my file, I can go ahead and save it. I'm going to save it again on the desktop. Hopefully it's going to save it near the other one. And actually, I'm going to create a new folder for that. So I'm going to name it, create a new folder. So it'll save it in the same place. It's going to be bagel demo. Okay, so save that on my desktop. Now I'll go ahead and I'll save that there. And I'm also going to go back to my original Photoshop file, which is still here, and I'm going to save that there as well. So I'm going to do a save as. Save it on the computer. And I want it to be in the same location. So I'm going to call it bagel blanket for demo. And I want it to be, let's see. It's on the desktop. Let's look at this, the list. Let's look at date modified. There is my bagel demo. I want to put all of these in the same folder. There's a reason why I'm doing that, which will become apparent in a minute. Okay, so I have in that folder, I have my original Photoshop file, and I have my first saved version for the web. But now let's say I plan on doing some other things with this particular image. Another thing that I could do is I can decide, well, I want to add transparency to this image for some reason. Maybe I want to put a little, I want to exclude all of this, but I want to just have a nice little shot of her head. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this layer again. I'm going to turn these off. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a little elliptical or circular selection here around her head. Okay, so if I go ahead and I use the clipping mask here, notice that it cuts all the rest of that away. And so maybe I want this style image on the web. So to do that, JPEGs cannot, you cannot have transparency with JPEGs. So that leaves me two other file formats. I can use either a GIF or a PNG, but and the difference between those is that with GIFs, you can either have total opacity, or if you do choose to have transparency, it has to be 100% transparent or zero opacity. You can't have anything in between. On the other hand, if you use a PNG 24-bit, you can have partial opacity. So my choice for this would be to have this one as a GIF file. So I can go back up to File, Export, and use Web Legacy. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename my files here. I'm going to turn this one on here, and I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to call it, and you have to use the structure that I explained a minute ago. I'm going to call it bagel blanket demo dot JPG or JPEG or JPEG, doesn't matter. Okay, I'll just use JPG. And then for this one, I'll turn this one on, and I'm going to name this one bagel blanket. Oops, gotta use lowercase. BAGEL blanket demo GIF. Okay, yeah, the proper extension. Now what I can do, without much muss or fuss, I'm going to go ahead and let me rename this. I'm going to go ahead and use the JPEG with an image. Okay, so JPEG. Make sure that's correct. JPEG. Okay. Okie doke. So now what I can do is I can go to File, and I can go to Generate Image Assets. And wherever your original Photoshop file is saved, it will generate a folder with these saved files inside it. So now what I can do is I can hide this for the time being. Let's move this down. Now my horribly there it is right here. Fortunately, it's there. So you can see that I have, here's Bagel Blanket for demo, version 1. I saved that there and there. But if I look inside this assets folder, you can see that I have the GIF and I have the JPEG, and both of them are there. Very nice. So I can look at that there. You can look inside there. And you can see there's the JPEG and there's the GIF, saved correctly for the web. Now I have one more to do. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to bring this back up. And I'm assuming everybody can still see everything. Okay. So let's go ahead and copy this one again. I'm going to copy this layer. So I'm going to hit Command J to copy the whole layer. In this one, I'm going to name, instead of GIF, I'm going to name it PNG. Because as I said, with PNG files, I can include partial opacity. So I'm going to go ahead and I've got this one selected here. I'm going to turn this off. Okay, so we can see what's going on here. But I can take the opacity on this layer and I can turn it down. Let's say I only wanted just a little ghost of the image, 50%. You can't do this with a JPEG, with a JPEG or a GIF, but I can do it with a ping. So I can turn these back on, and I can go back to File, and I can go to Generate. And I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to go back and do that again. Generate image assets. And let's look at that file, that folder again. Double click. And we can look inside there, and you can see I have my 3 files now. There's the GIF, there's the ping, and there's the JPEG. Now, what's nice about this is that what if I decide to make a change to one of these images? If I decide, let's try something down here. Let's try the JPEG and see if we can see a difference or not. What if I apply an adjustment layer to this? Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and let's turn this into a black and white image. Okay. So I got to turn, let's see, that's not what I wanted. That's brightness, contrast. What am I thinking of here? So let's select this. Let's go back to adjustments. That's the one that I want. Okay. So notice that these others that are above are colored. But what I should be able to do, if that is affecting it, and I'm going to check to make sure, I'm going to double click here, and I'm going to look at the JPEG to see if it is, and it's still full color. So what that means, what I need to do is that I need to join these two together. So if you recall, if I select both of these like so, and I hit Shift, Option, Command E, I create a new combination layer. So I'm going to call this a little bit different. I'm going to make this one Bagel Blanket Demo Black and White EW.jpg. Okay. Now let's go ahead and look back in here and see what I have. So now I have my black and white version as well. So on the fly, I have all these separate versions that I've created in a very short amount of time. They're all, of course, the same, approximately the same size, but I've saved them in the proper format. I've named them correctly, and I've kept the original intact by leaving my Photoshop file over here. So I have all of these images ready to use to edit, make any changes that I want at any time in the future without compromising the images that I'm using for the web, and vice versa. Because if I were just to save the image as a JPEG and I wanted to go back and revise it, I couldn't, especially if I wanted to use it as a larger image. And remember, I saved and I kept the original image that what I would use for print is a separate. So all of your files that you're going to use for the web should be isolated and separate from the ones that you're going to use for print. But it's really quite simple these days to save for everything as needed. I can leave all of these turned on, and I can save this again. I'll do File. I'll just go ahead and just save. And I've updated my Photoshop file, and I'm set to go. So my demo is only taken, it's a little bit less than half hour today. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to pause the recording.